I was saying to somebody the other day that in, 35 years of covering the car industry, I have never seen it in such confusion and uncertainty. Traditionally when you would sit down with executives or people from car companies, they'd be sitting there pretty smugly because in their head they'd be, because model cycles are 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. So they'd be thinking next generation ahead of that, So normally they'd have a fairly good idea of what they're doing, what their plans are, where they're going, and again, if you think about legacy car companies, they've got 130 years of building, petrol and diesel cars. So, they got a fairly good idea of the market, of the industry, of the technology. And of course, the technology didn't rapidly evolve. It's slowly, cars have got better and better. Engineering has got better and better. The cars have got safer and safer. The technology has got cleverer and cleverer. But ultimately, it hasn't radically changed, dramatically changed. It's still an internal combustion engine. But since the advent of, obviously, the transition to electric vehicles, and also, I guess, even more than that, the impact that governments, authorities, legislators, and policymakers have had on how car companies conduct their business, this, I think, has really not just wrong-footed the car industry, but left it in something of complete disarray as to product planning and planning of its future campaigns. So it's really interesting to see what actually is happening to the car industry. Why is this happening? And what it could lead to. What are the implications? So I'll tell you what, let's get into all of that right after this.
A brown car guy.
Right, so there are obviously several reasons and several aspects as to what is happening to the car industry and why, as I said, it's in a state of unprecedented confusion and indecision. And obviously one of the key factors, as we've already kind of touched on in the intro, is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, the arrival of electric vehicles, the growth of electric vehicle sales, the legislation that compels consumers to buy them and manufacturers to produce them, and then subsequently and presently and most currently, the apparent slowdown in the sale of EVs, just at the point at which we've reached that tipping point where manufacturers are supposed to be focusing more on the electric versions of their product range than they are of the traditional internal combustion engine versions. And this is not just me saying that, because before, again, people will be like, oh, this is just an anti-EV bit of propaganda. It's not. I really like EVs. I've reviewed loads of them, far more than I ever have in my entire career. I've reviewed in the last 2 or 3 years, and some of them are like my favorite cars. When people say favorite EV, I immediately say BMW i4 M50. Oh, awesome! What a machine! I'd have that. So no, absolutely not. But you've got to be realistic about these things. And as a journalist, as somebody who is an observer of the industry, a fan of the industry, passionate about the industry, passionate about cars, but also an observer, then you have to look at these things and wonder, well, what's going on? Where are we going? And obviously, I'm also like, I like to look at the future. I'm a science fiction fan. It's one of those things that I'm always thinking, what's coming next? So actually, far from being, obstructive to advancement or development or resistant to new tech such as EVs and autonomous systems and something like that, I'm actually quite excited about them. But also I'm also a little cautious about them because I'm like, okay, well, let's see, because we have to see where we're going, we have to see what we're doing with it. It's like with everything else. AI, I love AI, I've adopted AI, I do use a lot of AI, but at the same time, I think that, we have to be very suspicious of AI and we have to be very careful with AI because, this is not a feature about science fiction movies that show you AI, but there's plenty of movies out there which you can look at and they'll give you good reasons. But again, going back to electric vehicles, as we know, EV sales had been growing quite dramatically, and we've had the rise of a new range of companies, such as obviously Tesla, which has sort of ridden on the waves of that success, but also some Chinese companies that have come into the market and really had massive presence now already, such as BYD, for example, which actually has overtaken Tesla now in terms of EV sales. But what we have found, so this is some stats. So EV sales growth is expected to drop to 16% in 2024 this year. 16% this year. That's the growth. It's not the sales, that's the growth. Keep in mind, that's the growth level, so how much it will grow. However, which, 16% is quite good. You think, wow, 16% growth, that's not bad. However, in 2023, it was 64%. 2023 experienced 64% growth, and in 2024 we are expecting 16%, even in China. So China is basically where all these EVs are coming from. If they're not coming from there, then the components are coming from there, the batteries are coming from there. In many cases, that is how it's working out. Not in all, but in many. So and we know that the Chinese car industry has exploded on the back of the fact that they've been very early into the EV market and focused on producing this new age tech of cars. Well, the growth rate there was 36.5% in 2023, and you're thinking, oh, it's a bit less than 64%. Yeah, but don't forget, that's all they've been doing is making Chinese cars. So the growth, proportionately speaking, wouldn't be as high, but still 36.5%. This year is expected to be 11.1%. Again, I'm talking about growth. So I'm talking about share of the market. It's just the level of growth. So there's still growth, but it's much, much less, which is not good for the fact that most legislators, policymakers, governments want us to move rapidly towards EVs, but actually that's a significant slowdown. So it's not like nobody's buying them, it's just a significant slowdown. But of course, there are many reasons for that. I won't get into that now. I've covered that in other videos. But let's look at, and I'll come back to a little bit more about EVs in a minute. But I just want to see what else could be influencing what's happening to the car industry at present. One of the things are geopolitical factors. And for example, we've already talked about China and how China has really kind of come into the market in a massive way and really kind of disrupted the legacy industry by coming in and bringing a ton of new brands, new products, new ways of doing things, and new technology, and really sort of stealing the march on the EV thing as well compared to the legacy car manufacturers. So that's really, really kind of upset the automotive apple cart, so to speak. But then there are other countries such as India, for example. India is massive. India obviously owns a lot of companies like, for example, JLR, Jaguar Land Rover. It has tie-ups to people like Suzuki, and it has its own companies as well, and they are building a ton of cars. And already we're seeing countries or even I would say like the whole of Europe, continents even, fighting back. So for example, and I made this video recently, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's on my channel. Europe has now or is now introducing levies on electric vehicles from China. So the tariffs are up to 30%. In effect, they could be nearly 50% because combined with what is already there, added onto that, we're looking at about 48% of tariffs on EVs. So basically, like you buy an EV from China, it's about nearly 50% more expensive than it actually should be because of these tariffs. And this is Europe, admittedly. I know a lot of my viewers are here in the UK, and you think, well, that's not going to affect us. No, technically it doesn't. But when you consider that the UK is here, Europe is here, they introduce a tariff, and then on the other side of the Atlantic, America, oh my goodness, America has introduced or is introducing 100% tariff. 100% tariff. This is this year. This is from Biden. And not only on the cars, not only on electric vehicles, but also they've introduced tariffs on the parts. So this is actually really difficult for their industry. They've introduced tariffs on parts, and keeping in mind that a lot of the battery packs and everything are coming from China. So tariffs on battery packs, the tariff has increased to 25%, and on lithium-ion batteries, it's increased again to 25% for 2024. So this is really, I think, causing an issue, and of course how now nations or blocks of nations, continents, etc., are basically creating a kind of trade sanctions, trade barriers, trade wars, ultimately. So this is all very disruptive for an industry car industry that doesn't normally get involved in these sort of things, and it's really going to sort of rock the boat, if you like, in that part, in that industry. There's also been other issues that have affected the car industry quite badly recently. Post-pandemic, we had the big supply issue because we didn't have enough materials. Still a little bit of an issue because the industry has still just been playing catch up. At one point in America, they were actually sending out brand new vehicles without some of the options and telling customers that we'll retrofit them later because we just don't have the chips and the semiconductors that we need to do it. So here's the car without your heated seats or your reversing sensors or whatever, and bring them back once we got them and we'll retrofit them. So that's kind of weird. So that was happening. The semiconductor shortage was causing a big problem. This actually is in 2023, and then global production actually increased by 3% last year, I think directly as a result of that. But don't forget, we also had in Europe, we have the war in Ukraine. It's ongoing, of course. And that actually has also affected supplies as well, and also like other supplies such as aluminium and steel. Customer behavior, because this is the other thing, is like we have a new generation of people that are not necessarily as eager to even get a driving license, never mind get a car. And you can't blame them. And again, I've covered this in other videos, so you can check back through my channel. But when you talk about the cost involved, I mean, just in learning to drive. I remember when I took driving lessons, I think about £10 an hour, less or something like that. And my son is currently taking driving lessons. They're about £40 an hour. I mean, it's just staggering, And when you think about, that's just getting your license and how long that will take and the cost it will take. And also, by the way, it's really, really hard to get dates for the test right now because there's still a massive backlog left over from the pandemic. So you're running into 7-8 months, something like that, before you can get a test date. And on top of that, it's just once you've got your license, the cost of insurance. I mean, the insurance is just rocketed everywhere anyway. Then when you think about younger people trying to get insurance, it's just absolutely bonkers. And then all the costs that are associated with owning a car, parking a car, especially if you're in a city like London, parking a car, keeping a car, it's absolutely crazy. So you can't blame them. And of course, I talked there about owning a car, and a lot of people are shifting towards a different model of ownership. So not really owning a car at all, but for example, of course, leasing a car, but also car subscription services, which actually were something that were taking off or were starting to happen before the pandemic. Then of course the pandemic happened, and then of course people thought, I don't really like the idea of sharing a car because of the pandemic and also the fears that we had coming out of the pandemic. But I think maybe we're starting to go back to that again, and then people are thinking, well, actually, I don't need to own a vehicle. I just need to have use of one when I need it. And that's where car subscription services and things like that come into it. Hey, are you enjoying this video? Then make sure you hit the like button. It's very important. Plus, comment, share, and make sure you're subscribing. But the main thing, of course, is the dramatic and radical transition to electric motor power. And this, of course, has caused major upheaval in the car industry. Like I said, it's disrupted the car industry as a whole because of the new players that are coming in and the legacy players that are kind of trying to find their place in this new world order, if you like, and having to pivot. And that's the other thing, I need to keep making this clear to people, because a lot of people are like, oh, the reason the governments are forcing us to buy electric cars is to help the car industry. No, the car industry does not like this, or at least the traditional legacy car industry does not like this, because this requires a dramatic and massive pivot on their part. China, yes, that's a different thing, because China, like I said, that's a relatively recent industry there, a relatively nascent even, if you like, in terms of the history of the car industry, and they've been able to create their entire industry around the idea and the understanding and the concept that they will be creating electric vehicles. So the supply infrastructure, the peripheral industries, the part suppliers, everything is geared towards doing that. So there isn't like a massive pivot, there isn't like a massive change that has to happen. That's just part of the evolution of their industry. Whereas for the rest of the car industry globally, it requires a pivot, it requires a change, because these cars, electric vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, whilst they look the same, ultimately the technology is actually very, very different. The batteries packs are different, requiring in many cases what we have now for electric vehicles, not all of them, but most of them, they have a completely separate platform. So we're going back to the old days almost of body on frame, sort of thing, where the platform in itself is a complete unit, so it's a modular unit, so it's often they call it a skateboard, because the batteries are always sandwiched into the floor. and then the motors can then be integrated either into the front or back of this platform or directly into the wheels themselves. So, and then you can just put the body on top. So this is a completely different way of doing things. So the R&D required, the building required, the building mechanisms required, the assembly mechanisms required, the supply structure, where the batteries are coming from, where the lithium is coming from, where all the materials are coming from, and also the rapid. The other thing about this industry is or about the world of EVs is the rapid evolution. Because again, as I was saying, legacy car industry, yes, every few years they release a new model, and there's tweaks and there's improvements and there's this and there's that, and more performance, better engineering, certainly better safety. But there hasn't been like a massive jump. But with the EV industries, we are experiencing jumps on a regular basis because the battery technology is changing. In fact, the battery configuration, how they make the batteries, might change within the next couple of years. We might have solid state batteries, we might have sodium ion batteries, we might have completely different types of batteries, And this is down to there being a race to try and get batteries to be more efficient, to have greater range, to be quicker to charge, to be more robust, and to be safer. So a lot of this is happening, and this is what's causing this massive upset. So what's actually happening to car companies themselves? And how are they getting on? Well, I mean, Mercedes, for example, with the EQ range, I mean, they got massively ambitious. As a lot of the car companies have, they're massively ambitious about moving to electric. 2021, they announced an ambitious plan to go all electric by the end of the decade, 2030. And they did say that they would have electric-only vehicle architectures by 2025. In fact, they do, because the EQS, EQE, EQ, whatever, you put an EQ in front of it. Even the venerable old G-Wagon there's an electric version of it, or there will be soon. So they have kind of done that, but they are now sort of going back on that and saying that, okay, where we thought we would only be making electric vehicles by 2030, we think that's not really going to happen. We probably will still be making internal combustion engine vehicles beyond 2030. And this is something that, for example, has been influenced by a 21% drop in net profits in Q4 in 2023. So they're now talking about, in fact, I think the latest what they're saying now is that by 2030 they're expecting 50% of their sales to be EVs. That's by 2030. And don't forget that in Europe, 2030, or rather 2035, is actually the deadline, the cutoff point for stopping the sales of internal combustion engine cars, which also is the case here in the UK, although that's going to be changed back to 2030 once we get the new government on July the 5th, which is almost certainly happening. But don't forget there was an allowance in there for hybrid vehicles to carry on to 2035. But in Europe it was 2035, and again there has been some talk between the Germans and the Italians where they're trying to push that deadline forward, and in some cases saying, well, can we still have internal combustion engines if we can use alternative fuels, e-fuels, synthetic fuels, carbon recovered fuels, etc., etc. So I think that's happening. I'll try and bring you more. That's something that's still happening, and I will keep bringing you information on that, so stay tuned. Other manufacturers. And when you talk about when you talk about legacy, I mean, there isn't, Mercedes, I mean, the first car company in a sense, and then the first company for mass market cars, Ford. I mean, these are like the two giants in legacy automotive world, right? And again, Ford, in the UK, where they've killed off a bunch of cars, from Fiesta to whatever, Mondeo, Focus, they're all going, and they're focusing on the SUVs and on the EVs, so we've got the Mach-E at the moment, I think we've got the Ford Explorer EV now, but here again, they're having to sort of think again, they're having to go, whoa, let's just slow down a second here. So Ford has slowed down its transition plans. The company is being more cautious. It's balancing its investments because, at one point they were saying that, I can't remember what the figure was now, but it was something like they're going to lose 40,000 people in the transition from internal combustion engine to EV. Now don't forget, this is the other thing, it's all very well everybody saying, EVs are the way to go and we must do it because we've got to save the planet, but real people and real people's livelihoods and lives are also involved in this process. And the faster that we rush through these things, the less we think about the implications and the impact that it has on society and on people. And don't forget that, we're all trying to do the right thing here. We're trying to save the environment so that we can live in it and so that our children can live in it. But at the same time, you've got to be able to make sure that people can live, that they can afford to live, So it's got to be a delicate balance. You can't like rush one way or the other way. You've just got to try and balance these things together. And I think that this is where companies like Ford and its arch rival in America, GM, are really going, whoa, let's hang on a minute. Maybe this isn't quite something that we want to totally throw all our eggs into that basket. The other big company that I'm talking about is General Motors. Now, General Motors is very interesting to me because even when I was in Dubai, 2006 to the beginning of 2019. And even at that time, in fact, I think the first electric vehicle, I'm not actually sure, the first electric vehicle, I can't remember, I think it might have been the BMW i3 that I drove, but that was very briefly. But the first electric vehicle that I really sort of reviewed extensively was the Chevrolet Bolt, and that was in the UAE, and did a long drive in it as well. And General Motors has been banging on about moving to electric motors. In fact, they've killed cars like the Camaro because, they've already done that because they're like, no, we're committing to this, this is the way we're going. But in fact, they said that they would be phasing out gasoline, American term, right? Gasoline and diesel-powered duty vehicles, i.e. passenger cars, by 2035. But the company has faced significant setbacks, including slower than expected sales growth and the very high development costs that are involved in these vehicles. So they've also had to adjust their timeline and to rethink what they're doing and to change some of their model plans. Here in the UK, we have Jaguar Land Rover. Jaguar Land Rover have essentially, it's so weird with Jaguar Land Rover, honestly, because Jaguar Land Rover, if you think about it, they were known for two things. They were known for the E-Type. So in other words, brilliant coupes, brilliant grand touring sports coupes. So E-Type, XJS, XK, XKR, F-Type in latter day. And then the other thing they were known for were saloons, magnificent, fantastic, ministerial saloons, majestic saloons, right? They've killed all of those off. All they have now, I think there's a few straggling models left, but really the saloons are gone and the F-Type is gone. And all they have is SUVs. So they've got the E-Pace and the F-Pace, and they've got the I-Pace, which is their electric vehicle. And they came into the market quite early with the I-Pace, actually. I remember driving that, and that must have been like quite a long time ago. 7 years ago, maybe, something, I can't remember. But it's been around a while. So although like I-Pace feels like a new Jaguar, by EV standards it's old tech now. So and the fact that it's still out there means like, what are you doing, Jaguar? That needed to have been replaced and updated and stuff like that. So Land Rover as well is on this sort of situation where they got Range Rovers. Range Rovers, they are producing an electric version. They are doing electrified versions of them. But again, what are they going to do? Because they've already kind of, the irony of Jaguar is really weird, because the Jaguar was sort of saloons and coupes, and then Land Rover was SUVs and off-roaders, and now Jaguar's only got SUVs. They don't have the saloons and coupes anymore. And they were sort of prime people to sort of move into the EV market, but they've only got one that's been around a while and hasn't really done anything. We live in the UK. Jaguar's a UK company. I can't remember the last time I actually saw an I-Pace on the roads. See way more Teslas and VW ID ranges and stuff like that. So even EQs, even BMW I's. So it doesn't. What's happened there? And then of course this is a company that is also coping with the fact that a lot of its market is America, Middle East, and of course India as well, because obviously it's an Indian-owned company. So it has an extended timeline. It's saying that 60% of its vehicles will be zero emission by 2030. And again, I feel that is a change in what they were saying before. So that's something. Then you got Stellantis. Stellantis is the massive group now that basically saw the convergence of a bunch of European brands and America's Chrysler group. So in the Chrysler group, you had Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, etc., etc. In Europe, you had Fiat, Citroën, Peugeot, Vauxhall. And then of course within the Fiat group you've got Alfa Romeo. So it's like a lot of companies. And they've moved obviously heavily into the EV arena. So for example, with Fiat, as you know, the new 500 that replaced the original cute little 500. When I say original, I don't mean the original. I mean the reborn modern generation car became all EV. And I thought the Mini might do the same with the new Mini, but thankfully they haven't. They've gone, yes, we have done an EV, but we've still got a petrol version as well. And you can see what they're doing. They're hedging their bets. But Stellantis completely committed to it. And so again, they put substantial investment into this. So they are really going to struggle a little bit now, because they're like, well, where are they going to find the cells? And not only, and because they've done this, and because they own what was formerly Chrysler Group, Dodge and Chrysler, etc., etc. Now Dodge in America, I mean, second to the Mustang sales in America were actually the Dodge Challenger sales. Not even the Camaro sales, but Dodge Challenger sales, which was, I think, like 20-year-old tech, you know. But it was such a cool vehicle. It was like old school cool in a brand new body, you know, in a brand new vehicle. So it was selling and selling and selling, and then of course they were kind of forced to kill it off, and move to this new sales strategy. So they killed off the V8s, right? And they've now come up with the Dodge Daytona, Charger Daytona. So there's a new Charger. So the Charger is now available. So Charger's kind of replaced both the Challenger and the Charger, or maybe they'll come up with something else, I don't know. But because the Challenger was 2-door, the Charger was 4-door. Now they've got the Dodge Charger, the new one, comes as 2-door and as 4-door. But initially they said in 2024 we're going to release it as an EV, Dodge Charger Daytona. Now, a couple of things have happened. First of all, they've apparently had some delays with that. They've apparently had some testing issues, and that's now been put back from May. I think so. So basically, should already have been on sale. It's apparently not on sale. It's now been pushed to August, which is really weird, because that was 2024, and then in 2025 they were going to introduce the V6, I think, twin turbo version. No V8s anymore. So the Hemi, the legendary Hemi is dead. So the V6 versions were going to be introduced, right? So they are still coming. And it's interesting because when they did some stats, 78% of Dodge Charger owners and 64% of Challenger owners say they are flat out not interested in buying an electric vehicle. 78% and 64% said no, we don't want an electric vehicle. And if you take that as an industry average, the industry average, and this of course relates to America, was 47%. So Dodge owners are more traditional bunch, and they're like, no, we don't want EVs. In America there's like a demographic divide as well. Nearly half of Challenger owners identify as Republican. Only 16% say they're Democrats. So, and the thing is that with the EVs, it's actually, bizarrely, there are stats on this, it's the other way around. So with EVs, the people that want EVs, 48% are Democrats and 21% are Republicans. And also it's down to sort of the income levels and stuff like that, because Dodges are seen as more accessible, saloons, sports cars, etc., compared to the higher end stuff. So EV owners have a higher medium income. This is to do with America. Household income of $181,000. Challenger and Charger owners tend to be in the $94,000 or the $76,000 bracket, so respectively. So you can see that's quite a bit less. Almost half. You could say actually half. So they're really so Dodge have got a real problem here, and even like I saw this video that they put out. I just shared it on my Facebook page as well. They put out a 10-minute video. This was a few months back that they put it out, in which they were it was kind of like a launch video for their Dodge Daytona, the EV version, in which they kind of time travel back to the earliest days and they meet the Dodge brothers. But it's almost like they've gone back there to plead with the Dodge brothers to kind of forgive them that they've done this, but they've had to do it because they're not being allowed to make V8s anymore. So it's almost like this is not so much a promotional video as it's almost like saying, yeah, here's our EV, which is awesome, but it's awesome because we decided that's what we're going to do. It's funny because he actually said in the video, he said, well, electric vehicles are supposed to be more efficient, friendly to the environment. Well, it might be, I don't know, that wasn't really the point. So we were just like, we're making an awesome vehicle, and the reason we were doing that was because we've been told we have to do an EV. So we thought, okay, well, it's almost like we're making an EV under protest. It's like, right, okay, I have to make an EV? All right, well, I'm going to do it my way then. I'm going to do it this way. So, and that's kind of what they were saying in that video. So I think that's how they were trying to relate to people. It's like, almost like saying that you don't want an EV. Well, we're in the same boat. We actually don't want an EV either, but we're being forced to make one, so here it is. But now that we've made it like a Dodge. That's kind of what they were trying to say. It's very strange, but also kind of like you kind of get it, So, but even then, there was one report that came out that said that of the people who were interested in the new Dodge Charger, 82% said they would wait for the V6. There you go. And again, talking about the V6 V8 thing, because again, that also is based not so much on the EV market, but on legislation towards lower emissions and environmentally friendly vehicle production and vehicles, and also the changing consciousness of buyers, I suppose. You had the incident recently where Mercedes had the C63 and took the V8 out of it, and you go, and we were, what? I mean, even now I'm lost for words. How can you have a C63 without a V8 in it? To put like a 4-cylinder hybrid turbo thingy, And the thing, of course, it was very powerful and very fast. Although the other thing, I've seen a few reports recently where people are saying that all of these new generation of 4-cylinder engines, which are super, super powerful, I mean, it's like the most power we've ever seen out of a 4-cylinder engine, but they are imploding ultimately because they just can't cope with doing that. They can do it, but in the end, at some point in the future, they'll just implode because they're just not up for it. Whereas, you get bigger engines like V8s, they're less stressed. So they put a lot of power out, but they're less stressed about it because they got 8 cylinders. And it's interesting that the sales have been so abysmal on the C63 that Mercedes is now saying that they're gonna fit the upcoming CLE 63 with a twin turbo V8. so you can see that they've gone back to that. Sorry to interrupt the video, guys. Hope you're enjoying it. In the meantime, I wanted to tell you about this. It's my first novel, The Ulez Files. It's all about cars. It's for you guys. Get your copy now at Amazon.com. And there's something else that indicates that we're not quite done with the internal combustion engine, because as some of these manufacturers start to backtrack and go back and switch the lights on in the rear R&D department that was building new generations of ICE engines, there's actually an entirely new setup that's actually been announced, that is actually now this year been confirmed. It was announced last year, it's already been confirmed this year, and this is a tie-up between, again, Chinese company, Geely, whatever you want to call it, which is massive, and they have tied up, or they've made a joint venture with the Renault Group, and they've launched something called the Horse Powertrain Limited, with its headquarters here in London. And basically, the idea for this is to basically create the next generation of internal combustion engines, hybrids, etc., etc. This has now, been passed into. This has been now confirmed that it is happening. It was announced in May of this year. Each of the sides have a 50% stake, and they aim to produce about 5 million powertrain units annually, targeting 15 billion euros in revenue, and they're going to sell them to companies. This includes engines, transmissions, hybrid systems, and in some cases battery solutions as well, but primarily internal combustion engines. And they will be selling these to, of course, Renault Group and Geely, but also Volvo, Proton, Nissan, Mitsubishi. There'll be 17 plants across the world, in 130 countries. 5 R&D centers, so research and development in internal combustion engine is going to continue, it seems, and approximately 19,000 employees. And they're going to lead the way in hybrid solutions, full hybrids, long-range hybrids. So, this, I mean, you could say that, well, the delays in moving towards the EV adoption is going to impact the environment, and this is true. But having said that, don't forget that there's also a race to look at alternative fuels. Now, I know the arguments when people say, oh, well, it's impossible because the alternative fuels are too expensive and the scale, there's not enough of them, it's too hard to get. It's going to be left for the elite, So there's one point of view, there's one sort of school of thinking that says that petrol engine cars, diesel engine cars, or primarily petrol engine cars, will only remain for the elite that can be able to afford very expensive alternative fuel. E-fuels, synthetic fuels, carbon extracted fuels, etc., etc. Maybe. But on the other hand, don't forget economies of scale. So as countries and people decide that we're not going to be pulling this stuff out of the ground anymore, but we can extract it out of the air, or we can grow it, or we can synthesize it, or then once that demand is there, then the infrastructure will grow. I mean, again, the carbon extraction thing, there's only like a couple of plants, but and they're expensive. But if you imagine that suddenly people think, this is a really good idea, we can extract carbon. Because already they're talking about creating these things to extract carbon out of the air, but they're talking about just burying them back in the ground again. But actually people are saying, well, you extract it, turn it back into fuel, and then use the fuel, and then extract it again. Essentially, that's kind of like a net zero. Because, whatever you're using, you're pulling out and then using and then reusing. So it's recycling. So it is a problem. But also, like, there's political problems, there's economical problems, and don't forget, as I mentioned earlier, there's the problem with the shift to EV potentially losing jobs, especially in Europe. I mean, in China, of course, it's creating jobs, but here it's a different thing. Although even in China, with these new sanctions, it's going to be different. If these sanctions 100% in America, I mean, that's like, forget about it. And then 50% in Europe. So. And like I said, Britain, we will, although we're not bound by that, but we will have to go down that route because, if America is doing it and Europe is doing it, especially with the new government, I'm pretty sure they would follow suit as well. So, this is not to say that, I'm not trying to say that, the industry is not moving towards EV, because there is still growth, as we've said before, and it is moving in that direction, and it has to move in that direction, and we kind of have to move in that direction. But ultimately, like, as I've always said, I think the future will be a melting pot of multiple different solutions for mobility. So as well as EV, as well as petrol, as well as diesel, as well as hydrogen, as well as dilithium crystals, antimatter drives, I don't know. There has to be a whole range of options. We can't like just put all our eggs in one basket, because that's definitely a way to disaster. And certainly with the car industry, I mean, I think that it's inevitable that we're going to see a lot of the legacy car makers disappear, because they're just not going to be able to survive in this environment. It's just going to be too much. And also this current situation where we've got this back and forth, we're like, okay, we're going this way. No, we're actually going this way. No, actually we need to pivot back this way. You can see the investment is just going to destroy them. This investment here, pull it out, put it here, pull it out. It's just going to wipe these companies out. So, or they're just going to be bought by other companies, i.e. China. So that's what's going to happen. So anyway, so that's currently what's happening at the moment. We are seeing a slowdown in growth, and we are seeing a lot of manufacturers getting cold feet when it comes to this dramatic and radical transition to EVs. So right now it's almost like a holding pattern. It's almost like, well, let's see what is going to happen. Let's see where this is going to go. I will be keeping an eye on it. I will be keeping you updated. But at the same time, I'd love to hear your comments on it as well. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.